I was used to hearing my name said with disappointment. In our house, silence usually meant I had failed at something again. If I spoke about my plans, my parents would exchange looks like I was being unrealistic. If I stayed quiet, they assumed I had nothing worth saying. The night they received the gala invitation, I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to. I could hear their laughter from the living room. My mother's voice was light and proud. My father sounded impressed, almost excited in a way I rarely saw. They talked about who would be there, what it meant for their reputation, and how being included proved their place among the right people. Then my name came up. Not with pride. Not with hope. With a quiet joke about how I wouldn't last 5 minutes in a room like that. My father said I'd feel out of place. My mother agreed that I didn't have the polish or connections. They spoke as if I wasn't just a few steps away listening. I stood there staring at the counter, my hands pressed against the cold surface. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something heavier. A realization that no matter what I did, they had already decided who I was. Over the next few days, I watched them prepare. Tailors came for fittings. Phone calls were made behind closed doors. Every detail mattered. Every appearance had to be perfect. And through it all, they never once imagined that I might have my own reasons to walk into that same room. Growing up, it was clear that Aloan and I lived in the same house, but under different rules. When she got into a private academy, my parents hosted a small dinner to celebrate. They invited neighbors and business friends. My father gave a short speech about her bright future. When I finished a certification course with top marks the same year, my mother only said, "That's good. At least it's something practical." Aloan spent weekends at charity luncheons, sitting beside important families and learning how to speak with confidence. I spent mine working part-time jobs my father arranged, saying it would build character. When I mentioned bigger goals, like starting something of my own, my parents would smile tightly and tell me to focus on stable work instead of chasing unrealistic ideas. At family gatherings, Aloan was introduced with pride. My parents listed her achievements one by one. When it was my turn, they kept it short. "He's figuring things out," my mother would say, as if I was a problem still waiting to be solved. If Aloan made a mistake, it was called a learning experience. If I made one, it became proof that I lacked discipline or refinement. Even when I succeeded, they found a way to shrink it. Luck. Timing. Someone else's help. After a while, I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped looking for approval. I learned to keep my plans to myself because every time I shared them, they were compared to hers and found lacking. That kind of favoritism doesn't break you loudly. It breaks you slowly, until you start questioning your own worth. The scholarship letter arrived on a quiet afternoon. I remember staring at the words for a long time to make sure they were real. Full tuition. Housing covered. My grades and entrance exam scores had earned me a place at a respected preparatory institute known for shaping future leaders. For the first time, I felt chosen. I showed the letter to my parents that evening. My father read it carefully. My mother's expression was hard to read. They didn't celebrate. They didn't hug me. They said they would think about it. A week later, they told me it wasn't practical. The school was far. The environment wouldn't suit me. It was better to stay close to home and focus on something more stable. I argued softly, but the decision was already made. Months passed. I stayed home. One night, we attended a formal dinner hosted by a wealthy family. I stood near the back of the room while my parents spoke proudly about Aloan's future. They described her as their bright hope, their rising star. They mentioned her connections, her potential, her polish. They never mentioned my scholarship. I realized then it wasn't about distance or practicality. It was about image. My success didn't fit the version of the family they wanted to present. Aloan did. I walked outside for air that night. The cold hit my face, but it cleared my thoughts. I understood something important. Sharing blood didn't guarantee support. Being family didn't mean being protected or encouraged. From that moment, I stopped expecting them to open doors for me. If I wanted a different life, I would have to build it without waiting for their permission. After the scholarship was pushed aside, I stopped trying to convince anyone of my worth. I kept my head down and focused on what I could control. I found two friends who believed in the same idea I did, creating a specialized logistics company that handled high-value shipments for small luxury businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it had potential. We worked out of a small rented space with cracked walls and weak heating. During the day, I handled clients and paperwork. At night, we planned routes, studied supply chains, and tried to improve our service. There were weeks when we barely slept. Some clients ignored our proposals. Others said we were too small to trust. I never told my parents what I was building. At home, I let them assume I was just doing basic delivery work. It was easier that way. I didn't want their doubt hanging over something that mattered to me. When investors turned us down, their words echoed in my mind. Too inexperienced. Too unknown. Not refined enough for premium contracts. Each rejection reminded me of what my father once said about me. Instead of breaking me, it pushed me harder. We reinvested every dollar we earned. I skipped vacations. I sold my old car and bought a cheaper one to keep the company afloat. There were moments when I questioned if I was being unrealistic. But quitting would have proven them right. So I stayed quiet and kept building. No speeches. No announcements. Just steady progress, one contract at a time. About a year before the gala, we were close to running out of savings. One of our biggest clients had delayed payment, and two smaller contracts ended at the same time. The pressure was heavy. My partners looked at me like I had the answers, but I wasn't sure anymore. Then an email came in from a luxury property development company. They were expanding into several cities and needed a logistics partner who could handle secure transport for high-end materials and private installations. Bigger firms had already submitted proposals, but someone had recommended us for our reliability. We prepared for the meeting like everything depended on it, because it did. I stayed up all night reviewing numbers and possible risks. When I walked into their office, I didn't try to impress them with big promises. I spoke clearly about efficiency, trust, and precision. I showed them how we solved problems instead of avoiding them. A week later, they called. We got the contract. It wasn't just another job. It was long-term, stable, and connected to influential investors. For the first time, we weren't chasing small deals. We were part of something bigger. As we completed projects on time, our name started moving through professional circles. Quiet conversations. Recommendations passed between executives. I began receiving invitations to private meetings and formal events connected to the development company. At home, nothing changed. My parents were still focused on their own social goals. They had no idea that in some of the very rooms they were trying to enter, my company was already being discussed with respect. A few months before the gala, we had a formal family dinner at home. My parents had invited a couple they wanted to impress. The table was set perfectly, candles lit, everything polished. I came straight from work, still wearing my dark suit. It wasn't new, but it was clean and well-fitted. As we sat down, my father's eyes moved over me slowly. He asked about my car in front of everyone. I told him I had traded my old one for something more practical for work. He let out a short laugh. Practical, he repeated, shaking his head. Then he turned to the guests and said, Eloan is preparing to attend meetings with senators next month. Our son here is focused on delivering packages. The guests gave polite smiles. My mother adjusted her napkin and didn't correct him. Eloan looked down at her plate. I felt the words land, but they didn't hit the same way they used to. A year ago, I would have tried to explain myself. I would have defended my work. That night, I simply took a sip of water and stayed calm. He kept going, making small jokes about ambition and knowing your limits. I let him speak. I didn't argue. I didn't leave. Because I already knew something he didn't. The company he was trying so hard to impress at events like this was already working with mine. The rooms he wanted access to had started opening quietly. So I finished my dinner, thanked our guests politely, and walked out without saying a word. For once, his opinion didn't decide my value. As the season changed, talk about the Whitmore Gala grew louder. It was described as the kind of event where only the most connected people were seen. My mother spoke about it almost every evening. She mentioned seating charts, confirmed guests, and how important their table placement was. According to her, where you sat determined how much you mattered. She and my father treated the invitation like a trophy. They discussed what they would wear, who they needed to approach, and how the night could strengthen their position in certain circles. Every detail was planned carefully. One afternoon at work, a formal envelope arrived at our office. It wasn't sent to my home. It was addressed directly to me, with my full name printed clearly. Inside was an invitation to the same gala. The message was brief and professional. It thanked my company for its strategic partnership and expressed appreciation for our contribution to recent projects. The board chairman had signed it personally. I read it twice to be sure. There was no confusion. No +1 attached through my parents. No shared family acknowledgement. It was separate. Independent. I placed the card back in the envelope and locked it in my desk drawer. I didn't mention it at home. That night, I listened as my parents continued talking about the exclusive list, confident that access was rare and controlled. They never imagined my name was printed on that same list, not because of them, but because of work I built quietly on my own. The night of the gala felt calm, almost quiet, before everything changed. I arrived alone. The entrance was bright, with long red carpet runners and tall glass doors. Valets moved quickly, greeting guests by name. Inside, the ballroom was filled with soft music and low conversations. I gave my name at the reception desk. The woman checked the list, smiled, and welcomed me without hesitation. No questions. No doubt. I wore a simple black tuxedo tailored to fit properly. Nothing flashy, just clean and sharp. As I stepped farther into the room, I recognized a few faces from past meetings. One executive waved and walked over to shake my hand. Another thanked me again for the recent project completion. The conversations were professional and respectful. People nearby began paying attention. Not because I demanded it, but because of how others responded to me. I stayed calm and spoke clearly, discussing timelines and future plans. This wasn't new territory for me anymore. Then I noticed my parents across the room. They were standing near their assigned table, speaking with another couple. My mother was smiling confidently, holding a glass in her hand. She looked relaxed, proud to be there. When her eyes shifted in my direction, her smile slowly disappeared. My father turned next. I was standing beside the foundation chair, engaged in conversation. There was no confusion at the door, no hesitation from anyone around me. My mother's hand tightened around her glass. My father's expression changed from certainty to disbelief. For the first time, I wasn't outside their world. I was standing firmly inside it. Dinner had just been served when the lights in the ballroom softened. The foundation chair stepped onto the stage and thanked everyone for attending. He spoke about growth, partnerships, and the importance of supporting new leaders in business. Then he paused. He began talking about a company that had delivered consistent results over the past year. He mentioned reliability, smart planning, and strong leadership. As he described the work, I realized he was speaking about my team. He said my name clearly into the microphone and invited me to join him on stage. For a second, the room felt very still. Then people started clapping. I stood up and walked toward the front without rushing. My steps were steady. I could feel eyes following me, but I kept my focus forward. On stage, the chairman shook my hand firmly. He thanked me for honoring every commitment and for pledging part of our profits to support the foundation's new training program. He spoke about long-term vision and responsibility. Cameras flashed from different corners of the room. Applause grew louder. I glanced toward my parents' table. They were sitting completely still. My mother's expression was unreadable. My father looked like he was trying to understand how this was happening. I kept my speech short. I thanked my team and the foundation for trusting us. I didn't mention my family. I didn't explain anything. When my name echoed through the ballroom again, it didn't feel like a dream. It felt earned. The applause slowly faded, leaving soft chatter in the room. I stepped down from the stage and walked toward the drinks table, still collecting myself. That's when I felt someone approach. It was my mother. She forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Why didn't you tell us?" she whispered, her voice low, almost shaky. I turned to face her and kept my tone calm. "You already decided I didn't belong," I said. The words hung in the air, quiet but firm. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Eloane stood a few steps behind her, holding her clutch tightly. Her eyes were wide, watching me, listening to the conversation she had never been part of. Slowly, it dawned on her that everything she had been told about me, the comparisons, the favoritism, the idea that I was incapable, wasn't the full story. My mother glanced at Eloane, her smile fading further. I didn't need to explain. The truth was already clear to both of them. Years of hidden effort, late nights, and quiet victories had brought me here. And they had been spectators, never participants. Eloane didn't speak. She just looked at me with something like understanding for the first time. My mother shifted her weight, her voice barely audible, as if testing herself to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I turned away, letting the moment settle. I didn't need approval, and I didn't need their praise. The reality of who I had become, and what I had earned on my own, was enough. That night, the truth didn't humiliate anyone. It simply made them see what they had ignored for far too long. After the gala, the crowd slowly moved to other rooms, leaving pockets of quiet in the hallways. My father caught up with me in a narrow corridor, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "How did you manage this?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, taking a slow breath. For years, I had carried all the frustration, the quiet resentment, and the hurt of being overlooked. Now it felt like the moment to let it out. "I earned a scholarship years ago," I said, my voice steady. "You never mentioned it. You dismissed it. You ignored what I could do, while praising Eloane for everything she did." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "And everything after that, I worked for it. Every late night, every small contract, every risk I took, without your help. You told me I wasn't elite, that I would never belong. I built this on my own." He stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time. I could see the weight of realization in his eyes, though I didn't soften. "You wanted elite?" I asked quietly, letting the words land. "I built it myself." For a moment, no one spoke. The hallway felt smaller, tighter, heavy with years of unspoken words finally brought into the open. My father's hands twitched at his sides. He wanted to argue, to reclaim authority, but the truth was undeniable. I didn't wait for him to recover. I turned and walked away, letting my steps echo down the corridor. That night, I didn't just confront my father. I claimed the space he had always denied me. After the hallway confrontation, I returned to the gala quietly. I didn't seek anyone's attention. I didn't look for approval or applause. My focus was on the people who mattered, partners, clients, and colleagues who had worked alongside me and respected what I had built. Conversations continued around me. I smiled politely, discussed future projects, and made introductions for my team. The energy was different from my family's table, where tension still lingered. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, but I didn't turn to meet them. I didn't need to. When it was time to leave, I stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights reflected softly on the pavement. I walked to my car without looking back. The gala, the speeches, the recognition. It was all theirs to witness, but none of it depended on their reaction. The next morning, my phone buzzed repeatedly. My mother's name appeared on the screen. My father tried calling twice. I didn't answer. I let the messages sit, unread. For the first time, I felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't humiliate them. I didn't need to. Success was my answer. My work, my efforts, and the life I had built quietly, without their support, spoke louder than any confrontation or argument ever could. I had crossed a line they never expected me to reach. Driving to the office that morning, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about making others feel small. It's about living fully, achieving goals on your own terms, and leaving behind the people who never believed you could. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely free.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.